Welcome to Know the Job. I'm Alisha, your host, and this is the podcast where we dive into real careers to inspire students just like you. Today, I'm joined by our principal, Mr. Tolleson, of Lone Star High School in the Frisco Independent School District in Texas. How are you doing, Mr. Tolleson?
Great. Glad to be here.
Thank you for joining us on the podcast. So, I just want to start us off with a light warm-up question. What would you say is something interesting about your job that most people don't know?
You've got to have an interest in a lot of different things. I'm very fortunate to work here, and especially in a district like Frisco ISD where we have so many programs and opportunities for students. But you've got to be really invested in all of those programs, and you learn a lot about things that you don't necessarily have a background on, like podcasting, for instance. But I'm happy to be here and participate in those things. So
yeah,
you've got to have a broad interest set.
Yeah,
yes.
And we're really happy to have you on here. Thank you. Yeah. So if you could kind of guide us through some of the descriptions of your job or position.
So I manage everything that's related to Lone Star High School, from the budget to what's happening in classrooms to who's teaching what classes to the programs that we have for extracurriculars. It all ends up, somehow being related to the work that we do in this office. Now I have a really big team of people to help me with all that, and obviously we have teachers and coaches and administrators and counselors. But at the end of the day, my job is to manage all of that.
So from my knowledge, I know that a lot of teachers end up going into the principal position after years of hard work. But when you started as a teacher, what was it that inspired you to actually pursue that career in education?
You mean from the very beginning of my career?
From the very beginning.
Okay, so in the very beginning of my career, when I wasn't originally an education major. I was an English major, but my intent was to go to law school. And I, took the LSAT, and I had applied to law school, and I'd been accepted to law school. And then at the very last minute, I took a class that was just kind of an end of the year senior class, but it really is about focusing on your life and your values and just kind of constructing a life philosophy. And it was just really thinking hard about what my values were that kind of led me into education. And so from that point, I became an English teacher. I went through an alternative certification process, meaning that I didn't do student teaching. And so my first day in a classroom teaching was my first day to practice that. So I was not good when I first started. But you get better, you learn. It was important for me to work hard. I wanted to do well for students. And so that, I started teaching in a small town called Bonham, Texas, up near the Red River. Eventually moved to Frisco ISD, and then I've been at Lone Star since we opened in 2010. I began here as a teacher and then moved into administration after that.
Yeah, so that's a really good lesson on kids who think that they have their entire life planned out, but one moment could change the trajectory of their career. Now, we know how you wanted to pursue what kind of changed your morals and what you wanted to go into. Now, when you were transitioning into your position of becoming a principal, what were some of the challenges that you encountered in your journey, or how did that kind of look like for you?
Well, when you work in a place that's as diverse as Frisco ISD, a school is a place where you want everybody to feel like they belong to a part of a community. But the challenge is that not all of the community's values are the same set of values because we are so diverse. And so the challenge really is creating a place where no matter what your background is, no matter what your value set is, that you still find a place that you can be welcome, supported, and that you have opportunities to be successful. And that's what we try to do at Lone Star, but it's a significant challenge because, again, it's much easier if you have an organization where every single person feels the same way, they're moving in the same direction, but we're working with students who, they're still trying to find out what they're good at, what their interests are, and you're working with teenagers who they're biologically predisposed to not make the right choices all the time. And so, you have to manage all of those behaviors as well.
So kind of going into having to work with young adults who are going through such difficult times in their lives, how do you kind of encourage students to want to work towards their future and get past those challenges?
Well, I think, like you said earlier, I'm a prime example of it's okay to not know what you want to be when you grow up. And it's also when you're this young that no matter what's happened in your life or no matter what choices you might have made, every day is a new day. Now, you're going to have consequences for poor choices that you make. But very rarely do you run into situations that can't be recovered through work, progress, changing a set of friends, to a different place in the world to live. changing your setting, that, any life can be defined in a positive way through, perseverance.
That's a really good lesson. Our listeners, they're from all age ranges. But I feel like that one common thing that they all have is at some point in their lives, they've gone through some mode of adversity. Now, I'm sure that as a principal, every single day probably looks really different from you. From currently we're going through AP season, so managing that, or even, navigating different laws, or just so many voices of input, right? But if you were kind of averaging it out, what would you say a typical day would look like for you?
So a lot of my job is about communication. And so, my job is to kind of set the agenda for the school, whether it's in a whole year, whether it's in a month, whether it's in a 9 weeks, whether it's in a year, and, a year or a day. And communicating, what are our priorities for this week? What news do teachers need to have? What news do parents need to have so that they know what's going on in school? So a lot of my time is spent just preparing communication and preparing what the agenda for our leadership team is, so that way that mission can be carried on to the teachers, and that can directly impact what the student experience is like. So a typical day really is just me answering emails, setting meeting agendas, hosting meetings, interviewing teachers at this time of year, and then trying to be out in the halls, seeing students and being in classrooms as often as I can outside of those other times where I'm doing the planning of the school.
Now, I'd kind of like us to dive into specific key moments that kind of define Lone Star this year. One of that being we made it to the state championship.
Absolutely, yeah.
After such a long time. How did that feel for you, like being there in that moment?
So it was super special, and really just from the standpoint of, obviously, like, you want all of your programs to be really successful. Football is unique in that it really does bring like the community together, because we have so many other organizations that are attached to what's happening in the football team, from cheer to band to our dance team, color guard. All of those programs are, a part of like that Friday night experience. And when you can kind of go to that culminating, we're playing in the very last game of the season, and it's at AT&T Stadium, and you look in the stands, and like I just saw so many people who, had come through Lone Star, like as former students, former teachers had reached out about it, people that we just worked with, and the whole community in Frisco was so supportive. Kids from other schools were attending our games during that playoff run. I heard from other principals and teachers at other campuses, and it really didn't become like a Lone Star thing as much as it was a Frisco thing when we made. And just the positivity and the crowd that we had at that game was pretty extraordinary. The event didn't work out the way that we planned. Obviously we wanted to win and be, holding the big trophy at the end, but you have to be grateful for just the experience that we were able to have for our kids and our community as a result of that team's wins.
And it's such a beautiful thing seeing your entire school come together, people of such diverse backgrounds, interests. That is something that really draws them together. I remember the pep rally that we had outdoors, and it was just such a kind of inspiring moment seeing our team go through all of that. Now, going into our educational initiatives in our district, is there anything that you're looking forward to when it comes to really any programs or initiatives that are coming up in the school year, or like maybe next school year?
So one of the things just instructionally that we did that was like a concerted, what you would call an initiative, like we made a point to do this better for students in every classroom, because not every student is involved in some kind of extracurricular. And so obviously you want those programs to be done well. What happens in all of our classrooms are the things that affect every single student here. That is just sort of the foundational education that they're getting. And the thing that we really did differently this year was what we called our future ready assessments, where we get feedback a lot about helping our students make connections between what they're learning in the class and experiences that they might have in the real world or just context outside of school. And so, we did a lot of training, and we're going to, continue to grow in this area as teachers do, where we wanted every single class and every single teacher to have at least one future ready assessment of some kind, what we would call like a non-traditional assessment, not an essay, not a multiple choice test. We agree that there are places for that in education. You're going to see it on the STAR test or AP test or the SATs when you get to college. But at least once in 9 weeks, we want a chance for our students to be able to show their learning in a different kind of way and make some kind of connection to experiences that they'll have outside of school. And we did a lot of work on that this year. We still got room to grow when that comes to it because, some teachers are just not used to assessing in that way. But we were very encouraged with some of the results that we saw. And we saw some products from students this year that were just like really remarkable. Like it was pretty cool seeing some of the things that students were able to produce.
Now, for people who are kind of interested into leaning into your career or even education in general, what is like some key advice that you would give to those students who are interested?
I think doing anything where you have a chance to interact with people on a regular basis and developing your social skills and your communication skills. As a teacher, you really had, and especially if you want to teach in Frisco and Lone Star's no different, like being able to communicate with lots of different types of people and it is a key skill set that teachers need to have. Holding audience attention, being able to facilitate learning with people who learn in different ways, and just patience, flexibility, and communication, and just strong social skills. Whatever it is that you can do to build that background in yourself is going to set you up for success as a good educator.
Yeah, and I've really started to empathize with all the work that our teachers do ever since, I started working as a coding instructor.
Yeah.
And working with kids, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of mental stress, especially working with young adults and teenagers. There is so much that happens every single day. And so, I just want to give a special shout out to our teachers now that we're graduating.
Yep.
But having so many different characteristics and personalities, what is something that you tell yourself when you wake up to kind of get yourself ready for the day?
There's always going to be something that happens during a school day that I look forward to. There's a lot of things I don't look forward to. Like there are very hard parts of the job. If you get someone who, there's just things that happen in the lives of our students that you have to help them work through. They're not always like the most positive things. And sometimes you make decisions that a teacher doesn't like, or a parent doesn't like, or a student doesn't like, and you have to communicate why that's in the best interest of the school. So you have lots of difficult conversations a lot of times. But there's always something in the day that I'm able to look forward to, whether it's, all right, at least I know this might have been a terrible day, but we've got a band concert tonight, and I get to go and just watch one of the best bands anywhere in Texas perform. And so you kind of latch on to those small things that, again, like, overall, I love my job because our kids are incredible and our staff does a great job. And, just sort of being grateful and recognizing the positive things and that the fact that we're getting it mostly right almost all the time is a good thing.
And kind of reflecting on our past and then transitioning into the future. When you first started working into education, was there something that really surprised you about how the field itself worked?
That it is way more about communication and managing people and personalities than it is what your content is. Like I was a big reader and I taught English, so I was a big reader and I wanted to teach writing and I was, like the content is really, really important. And it's important for you to be smart in your content, but not as really as important as it is to know how to communicate that with young people who come from diverse backgrounds and think in different ways and connect them with what that content is. You've got to learn how to kind of like sell it, package it, make it to where it's interesting to people who might not have just a innate interest in it, And so like if English wasn't your subject, my job is to make you like this as much as you can possibly like this. I know that I already like this book, but I can see you don't like this book that we're learning about. But what can I get from you that's going to get you behind what we're learning in here as much as I possibly can? And that was the big challenge because, as an English person, I'm coming in already liking the content. But my audience, they might not always do that. So that's the trick.
It's like a double-edged sword. You kind of have to be a teacher, an educator, but also a salesman.
For real.
And know how to sell it to them.
Yep.
Now, there's a huge growth of AI happening, right? With students using it for good things, with reviewing, but also students plagiarizing.
Yep.
Now, when we look at how this is affecting our current education industry, how would you say it's kind of having an impact so far?
So it's having a huge impact because we're able to be more productive at a faster rate than we ever have before. Like I use AI quite a lot, just to help me create and communicate in a clearer way. Because where previously I was spending large amounts of time composing agendas and emails and things where I'm trying to explain very complicated, concepts to people, I'm now able to just kind of get my thoughts down and then use AI to help those thoughts be more coherent. I'm also able to use it to think through problems where, I use AI a lot to, whether it's Claude or ChatGPT, when I've got a scenario that I'm not quite sure how I want to approach. And I can say, all right, interview me about this scenario so that you have all of the information that you need to help coach me through. And then it becomes more of a thought partner than me just like outsourcing my thinking to the AI, which that's where I think students and people kind of get in danger, because you now lose kind of your authentic self a little bit if you're just sort of like, here's my problem, you solve it, and I'm just going to do what you tell me to do. Now in some instances that might be okay if you don't have any level of expertise in it, but we're talking about your life here, and we're talking about your education here, and we're talking about you kind of finding your voice a little bit as a student and as a person. And that's kind of what school is about. Whether you like a content or not, or whether it's easy or more difficult, this is about you kind of finding your strengths and developing your skill set as much as possible. And if you're giving that up to the AI, you aren't able to find that voice, and you're not able to find the real you through that learning process.
So one of the things that students can do is use AI as a thought partner, right, to review, but also test their own knowledge instead of just handing off all their tasks to it. But apart from that, when it comes to kind of tailoring it to our Frisco ISD students specifically, what are some of the key opportunities that our district provides that could, build future leaders?
So I think the things that some of the best things that we do are the things that are where we're putting groups of students in connection with each other. Like ISM is a wonderful program where students have an opportunity to do deep research on careers that they may or may not even enter into. You know what I mean? And I've seen it where lots of students do research on careers that they were sure this was going to be my job someday, and then through that process they discover this wasn't quite what I thought it was, and so I want to learn about something different. And that's, to me, is amazing. Not a waste of time at all, because this is what you do when you're young. Be going and exploring and learning about different things so that way you can find yourself a little bit. And so programs like that, where we're able to get students out of their comfort zone, connecting with people in industry, whether it's through our entrepreneurship incubator opportunity and our extracurriculars, where you're building community within those clubs and organizations and teams. That's where you really do learn that broad skill set, and you build a support system around yourself to build those teamwork skills, critical thinking, all of those things.
Yeah, and even in my perspective as a student, being an ISM has really helped me kind of be more prepared for college. And better my public speaking skills and
learning how to talk to strangers.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? Like that to me is just a skill in and of itself. Is you are just cold calling people in industry and wanting to learn about what they do, and that's very uncomfortable even for adults. And so when our high school students are able to do that, it's a huge leg up and a major opportunity for them.
Yeah, it's a huge kind of challenge with trials and errors, but that is one of the most essential programs that I feel has helped me become more successful.
Awesome.
Now, going into our closing questions, it was really great having you, but I wanted to ask if there was one really important life lesson that you have drawn from your career journey.
I think it's the importance of goal setting and asking questions. And I always encourage people to, set really high goals. You're going to hear me talk about this at graduation. I feel like our, to go back to the football thing, we did something that no other school in Frisco ISD had accomplished at that point, reaching a state championship in football before. And that comes from just having really high expectations for yourself. Our coaches had a really high expectation for our players and that team, for their performance. They in turn had high expectations for themselves. And even though they didn't achieve their goal, they still accomplished something that most had not done before. In fact, no one in Frisco had done before. And so if there's a lesson to kind of take from that, it is always set your goals extremely high, and then work towards them like you mean to accomplish them. And even if you don't reach that goal, you're still going to surpass most of the average people and really try to find what your real potential is. And so that's really my advice, and that's the reason why I'm in education. And then asking questions. Like, I've been doing this for 25 years at this point, and I've been the principal of this school for 5 years, and I've been here since we opened. If there's something to know about Lone Star High School, I probably know it. But I still ask a million questions a day because it's important for me to continue learning. It's important for me to do my job in the best way that I possibly can. And I know that I don't know everything. And so asking questions and asking good questions is going to help anyone in any career path be a successful person.
And if we were to close off with one final question, I have to ask you this. Now that there's one more week left of high school for us seniors, what is one final message you have for the class of 2026?
I've just really enjoyed the time that I've had with this class of 2026, and the thing that I'll always remark on is just the level of leadership that this class in particular has had, just in every aspect, whether they were involved or whether they weren't involved. This class had a voice. They were advocates for themselves, they were advocates for the school, and they were just really amazing leaders and ambassadors for Lone Star High School and for Frisco ISD the time that they were here. I'm going to miss this group a whole lot just because they really did do a good job of just embracing the experience of being in high school and making the most of it in all kinds of ways. So I will remember this group for a very, very long time. It's been great.
And we will end off today's episode. Thank you, Mr. Tolleson, for joining us and helping us know the job today.
Thank you.
All right. Until next time, listeners, we will see you in 2 weeks.